in the harsh, indifferent glow of street. Mary's emergency room. Daniel Alvarez sat hunched over. His work shirt still clung to him, damp with the unsettling crimson memory of his daughter's accidental fall. His hands, usually so strong, calloused from years of wielding hammers and hoisting steel, trembled uncontrollably. He tried dialing Isabella one more time. The phone's sterile hum offered no comfort, only the familiar, hollow ring of voicemail, a sound he'd come to know too well over the last dozen attempts. He whispered her name. Isabella, his voice a raw, desperate rasp, as if a softer plea might coax her across the miles from San Diego, might bring back the woman who had simply evaporated from their lives years ago. The surgeon's voice stayed steady, but carried an urgent, clipped edge. Mr. Alvarez, we can't proceed without consent from both legal guardians. It has to be your ex-wife. Daniel's chest tightened, a constricting band of fear. He wanted to scream that Lily was his universe, his very breath. He was the one who braided her hair, who conjured magic from meager ingredients in their kitchen, who endured every out-of-tune piano lesson. But in this unforgiving moment, none of that devotion registered. On paper, Isabella still held a legal claim, and without her signature, the small, fragile girl on the operating table was slipping further and further from his grasp. He buried his face in his palms, the hot sting of tears mixing with the familiar grit of concrete dust still clinging to his skin. Around him, the hospital pulsed with its relentless, indifferent rhythm. Nurses gliding by with charts, gurneys rolling past, the mechanical symphony of beeping monitors. But for Daniel, the world had shrunk. It collapsed into a suffocating silence, punctuated only by the ghost of Lily's voice, a memory that tore at his gut. Daddy, am I good enough? That question, an echo from the day Isabella left, pressed down on him like a crushing weight of helplessness. He could barely draw breath. He saw Lily's laughter, vibrant and untamed, filling their tiny apartment. He saw her fingers shyly coaxing melodies from the old piano. He remembered the way she called him her hero, even when he felt utterly devoid of strength. Now, a wall of red tape, cold and bureaucratic, stood between him and saving her life. He felt utterly powerless, stripped of every ounce of the rugged strength he had built through years of sacrifice. Then, through the blur of his grief, a hand touched his shoulder. Light, deliberate, yet holding a surprising calm that cut through the chaos like a silver thread. He lifted his head, his eyes gritty, and saw a woman utterly unlike anyone he expected in this dark place. Her blonde hair was impeccably gathered, a raven black coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, as though it belonged in another, far more glamorous world. A diamond caught the harsh hospital light and glittered on her finger. She didn't gaze down with pity, but with something quieter, something he couldn't quite name, a profound, knowing recognition. I know that feeling, she said, her voice a low, steady current, sitting in a hospital, desperate for someone to show up. And no one does. Her words, so simple, yet so deeply perceptive, slipped into the cracks of his heart, finding the quiet chamber where loneliness had lived for years. He blinked at her, unable to speak, unable to comprehend why this elegant stranger would choose to sit beside him. Invading his private agony with such gentle audacity, Charlotte Whitmore didn't recoil. Instead, she leaned in. Her presence became a sudden, warm anchor in his swirling despair. Her tone stayed soft, but resolute. You're not alone anymore. And in that moment, for the first time that night, Daniel felt the smallest, most fragile flicker of hope ignite within him. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding shuddered free. He became acutely aware of her scent, a faint, expensive perfume, a whisper of jasmine, and something green and fresh, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital air. Her proximity, a quiet hum against his own frayed edges, felt both startling and strangely comforting. His gaze lingered on her, trying to decipher the unreadable depth in her eyes. Charlotte sat beside him, her own gaze following the involuntary tremor in his rough hands. For a fleeting moment, she wasn't in the Chicago emergency room. She was back in Denver, in another sterile waiting room, the scent of antiseptic and fear still a ghost in her memory. She could still feel the cold, slender pen in her fingers as she signed the papers, turning her husband David's vibrant organs into lifelines for strangers. David had slipped away, leaving her alone in a chair much like this one, praying for a miracle that never came. No one had touched her shoulder then. No one had told her she wasn't alone. Looking at Daniel now, his shirt streaked with that dark, terrifying stain, his eyes hollowed by a despair so raw it mirrored her own, Charlotte felt a sharp, almost physical pang of recognition. Pain, after all, had no language of wealth or class. It was the singular, universal currency that turned strangers into kin. She reached into the pocket of her coat, pulling out her phone, its polished case gleaming under the relentless hospital light. "Henry," she whispered, her voice a hushed command when her attorney answered. "I need you at Street. Mary's right now. A little girl's life depends on it." On the other end, Henry Cole, accustomed to her cool composure in matters of philanthropy and estate, did not hesitate. He had never heard her voice quite like this. Urgent, breaking, alive with a passion that wasn't business. She explained the situation quickly. concisely. A father ensnared by archaic legal red tape. An absent mother unreachable. A child bleeding behind closed doors. Henry promised to make calls, to cut through the bureaucratic fog, to find a judge if he had to. Daniel watched her, his brows furrowed with suspicion, as though his mind couldn't quite reconcile the image of a woman dressed in silk and diamonds, caring so profoundly for a construction worker's child. He opened his mouth to speak, but Charlotte shook her head gently, a quiet, almost intimate gesture that silenced him. "Save your strength for her," she said, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Let me handle this." And so, while Daniel sat with his face once again buried in the scarred landscape of his palms, Charlotte paced the hallway. Her voice, calm but commanding, resonated through the sterile space as she spoke to Henry, to hospital administrators, to anyone who would listen. Her presence, almost regal despite the circumstances, seemed to subtly shift the very air, turning formidable obstacles into tangible possibilities. For the first time in hours, Daniel felt the ground beneath him steady, a fragile sense of hope taking root. A nurse approached, her clipboard a barrier between them and the world. Her expression, initially grim, now held a faint, almost imperceptible shift. "We've received authorization," she said, her voice clear. "The surgery can proceed?" Daniel exhaled so sharply it was almost a sob. His knees weakened, threatening to give way. But Charlotte's hand was there again, a firmly grounding presence on his arm. The relief that washed over him was overwhelming. A tidal wave, but so too was the disbelief. He turned to her, words tangled and inarticulate in his throat. "Why? Why would you do this for us?" Charlotte looked at him, her eyes reflecting the quiet, aching weight of her own memories. "Because one," she said, her voice catching, barely a whisper, "I needed someone to do it for me, and no one came." She steadied herself quickly, not seeking pity, only the stark, unvarnished truth. "I couldn't save David, but maybe, just maybe, I can help you save Lily." In that raw, honest moment, something unspoken, something profoundly intimate, passed between them. A delicate thread, woven from shared grief and nascent courage, from deep loss and the faintest spark of hope. Two vastly different worlds had collided in the most unlikely of places. A penthouse widow and a construction worker, bound by nothing but the raw, unvarnished ache of love for someone they couldn't bear to lose. Daniel lowered his head, unable to trust his voice. But he didn't need to. The silence between them, thick with unspoken understanding, said enough. And as the doors to the operating room swung open, Charlotte remained steadfast by his side. No longer a stranger, but something more. A witness. An anchor. Perhaps even the first fragile sign that he wasn't as utterly alone in this fight as he had always believed. He felt a warmth beside him. A quiet assurance that permeated the chilling fear long before the crash, before that desperate, soul-crushing night at Street. Mary's, Daniel Alvarez's life had already been meticulously shaped by sacrifice. He was 34, a construction worker whose days began before the city stirred. The alarm would sound at 5, and he would rise quietly in their modest apartment on the edge of Chicago, moving with practiced care, a silent guardian, so he wouldn't wake Lily until breakfast was ready. The kitchen, small and worn, typically smelled of scrambled eggs or pancakes, sometimes just toast and fruit, but always infused with the kind of deliberate care that spoke volumes, that told the little girl she mattered more than anything else in the world. When Isabella walked away 2 years earlier, she left nothing but a hastily scribbled note and a terrified child crying inconsolably on her bed. Addiction had led her down a path Daniel could not follow. No matter how desperately he wished, Lily could still have a mother's embrace. That night, when his daughter, through her tears, had asked, "Am I not good enough for her to stay?" "Daddy," his heart had fractured in a way that had never truly healed. From that excruciating moment forward, Daniel made himself a solemn promise. He would love Lily enough for two parents. He would never again let her question her inherent worth. Every afternoon after work, Daniel would meticulously scrub off the grit and concrete dust of the construction site in a gas station restroom. A ritual of transformation before heading to the community music center. There, he would sit on an old wooden bench, his posture unconsciously straightened, his rough hands folded patiently, watching Lily's small fingers coax hesitant, often uncertain, melodies from the piano keys. Other parents scrolled on their phones, checked their watches, but Daniel never once took his eyes off her. Each tentative note was a victory. Each shy, proud smile, a profound reminder of why every grueling overtime shift was not just worth it, but necessary. Back home, evenings belonged entirely to them. Sometimes it was helping with math homework at their small kitchen table, sometimes clumsily patching a rip in her school uniform with stitches that were more functional than elegant. But always, without fail, it ended with a story. Daniel would sit at the edge of her bed, his voice soft, even when exhaustion threatened to drag him under, reading tales in a melodic mix of English and Spanish. Lily would giggle, a bright, unrestrained sound, when he gave characters silly accents. And on the hardest, most punishing days, that sound was the only thing that kept him going, the only thing that truly mattered. Neighbors whispered admiration for the young father, who seemed to have aged a decade in 2 short years. His hands were perpetually calloused, his back often a dull ache, but his devotion never wavered. Friends at the job site teased him about never dating, playfully pointing out the widow from the first floor who always seemed to invent excuses for Daniel to stop by. He would only smile politely, a distant, gentle flicker in his eyes, and shake his head. "Lily needs me," he would say, though deep in his heart, it was more than that. His heart bore its own silent, unhealed scars, and he had no room left for risks that might hurt his precious daughter again. Yet even in the weariness, Daniel carried himself with a quiet, inherent pride. He wasn't rich, he wasn't polished, but when Lily looked at him with those wide, trusting eyes, full of adoration and unwavering belief, he felt like the luckiest man alive. She was his reason for every early morning, every late night, every single sacrifice, and though the world often dismissed him as just another labor in a hard hat, to Lily, he was everything. Her protector, her teacher, her best friend, the entire axis of her small, precious world. That was the man Charlotte Whitmore had found in the hospital waiting room, broken and desperate, but still fighting. And as fate would have it, the same powerful love that had carried him this far was about to intertwine with her own, changing both their lives in ways neither could have ever imagined. After the surgery, when the agonizing tension finally gave way to a profound, weary relief, Daniel thought Charlotte Whitmore would simply melt away, disappearing back into her rarefied world of penthouses and polished boardrooms. People like her, he believed, didn't linger in places like his, but she came back the very next morning, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips, carrying a stuffed bear almost as grand as Lily herself, and a stack of colorful children's books tucked neatly under her arm. She didn't arrive with the detached air of a benefactor. She came like someone who truly, deeply wanted to know how a little girl was healing, her presence a gentle inquiry into their lives. Lily's eyes, still a little shadowed, but sparking with new life, lit up the moment Charlotte entered her hospital room. She clutched the bear against her small chest as if it had been waiting for her all along. Charlotte pulled a chair close to the bed, her movements fluid and graceful, and began reading in a gentle, melodic voice that filled the sterile room with an unexpected, comforting warmth. When Daniel excused himself to grab coffee or speak with the doctors, he would return to the quiet, contented sound of laughter, Charlotte leaning in as Lily pointed at pictures, her face alive with pure, unadulterated joy. A quiet intimacy had begun to weave itself around them. When Lily was finally discharged, Daniel fully expected the fragile connection to simply fade. A pleasant memory, but it didn't. Charlotte texted to check in. Sometimes, just a few sparse words. How is she feeling today? Did she smile? And sometimes long enough to feel like a genuine conversation, a silent tether drawing them closer. She called on video in the evenings, praising Lily's vibrant drawings, reminding her, with a light, teasing tone, to do her stretches for physical therapy.
And when Daniel's relentless overtime shift made it impossible to take Lily to her first piano lesson after the accident, Charlotte volunteered without a moment's hesitation.
He wanted to refuse, his pride bristling, but Lily's hopeful, expectant face softened his resistance, making him relent. That evening, when Daniel came home, body aching and mind exhausted from the dust and din of the site, he opened the door to a smell he hadn't encountered in years. Sweet, warm, like a cherished memory of childhood. He froze at the doorway to the kitchen, his heart giving a startled lurch. There, flour dusted across the counter like a scattering of fresh snow. Lily stood on a chair, swallowed by an apron far too big for her, her cheeks smudged with dough. Beside her was Charlotte, her sleeves rolled up, a matching apron tied neatly around her slender waist, guiding Lily's small hands as they pressed cookie cutters into the soft, yielding dough. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move, rooted to the spot. The scene was so utterly ordinary, yet so profoundly foreign to his carefully constructed world. The sight of his daughter laughing so freely, so carelessly, with another adult who cared enough to simply be there, caught him completely off guard. A sudden, unexpected punch to his heart. He leaned against the doorframe, silent, watching the two of them giggle over a misshapen cookie that looked more like a cloud than a star. Charlotte noticed him finally, her cheeks coloring faintly, a blush that made her seem suddenly more approachable, more human.
We decided to bake to celebrate her lesson,
she said softly, brushing flour from her fingers. Sorry about the mess. Daniel shook his head, his throat tight, thick with unspoken emotion. It's fine, he managed, though his voice cracked on the words. What he wanted to say, what he felt bubbling up inside him, was, thank you. Thank you for the cookies, for the laughter, for making our kitchen feel like a home again. Lily beamed, holding up the tray of uneven shapes, her joy radiating. Daddy, we're making dessert. Charlotte says I'm a natural. He smiled, though his eyes burned. A sting of profound gratitude. It had been a long time since anyone besides him had stood in that kitchen with Lily. Longer still since he had seen his daughter's world feel so full, so utterly complete. And as Charlotte laughed, a faint dusting of flour still clinging to her cheek, Daniel realized something he hadn't dared to let himself feel in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, their lives didn't have to stay so small, so confined. Her presence in their small, warm space had shifted its very dimension. A week later, Charlotte surprised them with an invitation. "Why don't you come over for dinner?" she asked gently, her voice soft, as if acutely aware of how unusual, how charged the question sounded. Daniel hesitated, the familiar prickle of discomfort rising, but Lily's eyes widened with unadulterated excitement, her hopeful gaze softening his resistance. And so, on a cool Friday evening, he found himself standing with his daughter at the imposing entrance of a high-rise penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The doorman greeted Charlotte by name, a subtle deference in his tone, as she ushered them inside. The moment Daniel stepped through the grand glass doors, he felt the immense, almost physical weight of the space press against him. Marble floors reflected the cool glow of recessed lighting, and walls of glass stretched from floor to ceiling, framing the shimmering, endless expanse of the lake. It was breathtaking, a display of effortless luxury, yet it felt cold, too perfect, as if no child's laughter had ever truly echoed against these pristine walls. No messy life lived within them. Lily darted to the window, pressing her small hands against the cool glass. "Daddy? Look, you can see all the boats." Her voice, a bright, innocent chime, carried across the cavernous room, but Daniel stood awkwardly by the door, tugging self-consciously at the cuff of his worn work jacket. He didn't belong here, not with his calloused hands and boots still carrying the faint, earthy scent of the job site. Charlotte seemed to sense his unease, her perceptive gaze softening. She placed a hand lightly on his arm, a brief, warm contact that made his skin tingle, a silent reassurance. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" she said, her smile warm, but tinged with something else. A quiet, almost melancholic understanding. "But it doesn't quite feel like home?" Her honesty startled him. He looked at her, truly looked, then at the polished surfaces, the carefully curated artwork, the impersonal grandeur. He thought of his own tiny apartment, cluttered with Lily's vibrant drawings taped to the fridge, her piano books stacked haphazardly on the counter, the faint, comforting smell of tortillas and laundry soap permeating the air. That was home. This was something else entirely. Later, when Lily had finally drifted off to sleep in the luxurious guest room, Charlotte led Daniel onto the expansive balcony. The city stretched before them, a dazzling sea of twinkling lights flickering against the deepening night sky. The lake beyond, dark and endless. A vast, primal mystery. The wind off the water carried a distinct chill, but Daniel barely noticed it. He leaned on the cold railing, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon, and for the first time in a very long time, he spoke the truth, a truth he usually kept buried deep, shielded from the world. "Isabella left because she said I wasn't enough," he said quietly, his voice raw, edged with old pain. "Not enough money, not enough patience, not enough of anything. And maybe she was right. I work with my hands. I come home covered in dust. I don't have much to give Lily except me. And I worry every day that even that isn't enough." His voice wavered, the vulnerability in it stark and profound. Charlotte's gaze softened, reflecting the shimmering city lights. She turned toward him, her blonde hair catching the subtle glow, framing her face in an ethereal halo. "You're wrong," she whispered, her voice a soft, unwavering counterpoint to his self-doubt. "I see the way Lily looks at you. She doesn't need more. She just needs you." Their hands rested side by side on the cold railing, and when their fingers brushed, a light, electric current passed between them, neither pulling away. It was the lightest of touches, yet it carried the immense weight of something fragile and intensely real. A spark of nascent trust, a fragile, tender thread of connection woven between two broken hearts standing high above the city, daring, just barely, to believe that maybe they weren't as unworthy or as alone as they had always thought. Daniel looked at her then, truly looked at Charlotte, and for the first time, he saw not a billionaire widow, but a woman searching for a home, for a real connection, as much as he was. And in that quiet, suspended moment on the balcony, with the city lights flickering below them like scattered jewels, a seed of something new, something profoundly hopeful, began to take root between them. An almost palpable warmth against the cool night air. For a while, life began to feel almost ordinary again, touched by an unexpected grace. Charlotte visited often, her presence a welcome disruption to their routines. She helped Lily with homework, her patient explanations often clearer than Daniel's. She joined them for dinners in their cramped but warm apartment, the kitchen now smelling of Charlotte's quiet domesticity as much as Lily's laughter. Sometimes, after Lily had drifted off to sleep, Charlotte would sit beside Daniel on the sofa, a comfortable, companionable silence settling between them, the little girl a warm, dreaming presence between them. For Daniel, those evenings felt fragile but exquisitely real, like unexpected pieces of a life he had long stopped believing he could ever have. The quiet hum of her presence beside him, the brush of her arm against his, the easy flow of conversation or comfortable silence, it all built into a new, gentle intimacy. Then one afternoon, while sorting through a stack of paperwork for a small construction business he had been trying to start with a coworker, Daniel came across a thick envelope he hadn't noticed before. Inside were medical invoices from Street. Mary's, each stamped in bold red letters, paid in full. The total stared back at him, a staggering $70,000. His chest tightened, a cold knot forming, as his eyes raced over each page. Hospital charges, surgical fees, medication, all covered. None by him. He sat frozen at the kitchen table, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the sudden, deafening silence. Slowly.
Sharp anger began to rise within him, pushing past the shock.
He didn't need to guess who had done this. That evening, Daniel showed up at Charlotte's penthouse, the stack of papers clutched so tightly in his hand that the edges were creased. His boots echoed too loudly against her polished marble floors as he strode into the living room, where she sat with a glass of wine, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights. You paid these. His voice was low, but it shook with a raw, barely restrained fury. He dropped the invoices onto the sleek glass coffee table, the papers scattering like an accusation. Charlotte looked up, startled, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning comprehension. Daniel, yes, I did. Lily needed the best care. I had the resources. It was nothing for me. Nothing for you? He repeated, his voice breaking, cracking with an incredulous bitterness. $70,000. Do you have any idea what that number looks like to me? Do you know what it feels like to find out you've been turning me and my daughter into your charity project? His proximity to her was charged, the air between them suddenly thick with tension, a stark contrast to their usual gentle nearness. Her eyes widened, wounded, a sudden pallor spreading across her face. That's not what this is. I wasn't treating you like a project. I care about Lily. I care about you. No. Daniel snapped, pacing across the pristine floor, his fists clenching, the muscles in his jaw taut. You care about how we make you feel. The rich widow swooping in to rescue the poor construction worker and his little girl. It makes you feel needed, doesn't it? It makes you feel like you're fixing something you couldn't fix with David. Charlotte recoiled as if struck, her face paling further, her breath catching. Don't you dare reduce this to pity. Don't you dare think I'm here out of guilt. Her voice trembled, but there was a sudden, steely resolve in it, an unexpected strength. I love being with you. I love being with Lily. That isn't about money. Daniel stopped pacing, his shoulders heaving, his gaze fixed on her, pain etched deep into his face. Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me enough to be honest? Do you know what it feels like to wake up and realize I'm not a father providing for my daughter? I'm just a man being carried by someone else's wallet. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes, but her words came firm, unwavering, despite the tremor. I was protecting you. Daniel, I knew your pride wouldn't let you accept help. I was trying to make life easier for Lily without making you feel the weight of it. It's not about pride,
he whispered, his voice raw, thick with emotion.
It's about trust, and you broke it. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable. A chasm suddenly opened between them. Finally! Daniel grabbed his jacket, his boots striking the marble floor like punctuation marks of his departure. I should have known this was too good to be real, he said, his voice hoarse with disappointment and a bitter, self-fulfilling prophecy. People like you don't fall for people like me, unless there's something in it for you. Charlotte's breath caught, a soft, choked sound. Her hand trembled as she reached out, a desperate, yearning gesture, but he was already gone. As the door closed behind him, the sharp click echoed through the vast penthouse, leaving her standing utterly alone in a room filled with everything money could buy,
And absolutely nothing she truly wanted.
The lingering scent of his presence, of dust and faint cologne, felt like a cruel taunt. The days after their bitter fight were heavy with a suffocating silence. Daniel tried to throw himself back into his work, hammering nails until his hands blistered, his muscles ached, but nothing dulled the persistent, aching grief of losing the fragile bond he and Charlotte had begun to painstakingly build. He came home each evening to Lily's innocent questions. Where's Charlotte? Did she call? And each time, his heart clenched a little tighter, a fresh twist of the knife. He couldn't bring himself to explain why the woman who had become such an integral, comforting part of their daily lives had so suddenly vanished. Then came the letter. It arrived in a thick envelope, stamped with ominous legal markings that made Daniel's stomach twist even before he tore it open. His eyes scanned the words once, then again, his mind desperately trying to process, hoping that reading them differently might somehow change their devastating meaning. Petition for emergency custody, filed by Isabella Martinez. For a long, frozen moment, he sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling violently in his hands. Isabella, the woman who had walked out on them, who had left Lily crying on her bed with nothing but a hastily scribbled note, was now demanding to take their daughter away. And she wasn't doing it alone. She had hired Rebecca Walsh, one of Chicago's most aggressive, most ruthless family attorneys, a name Daniel had only ever heard in whispered tones. synonymous with bitter divorces and impossible custody battles. The accusations burned on the page: exploitation of his daughter's medical situation, financial instability, emotional manipulation. Each line painted Daniel not as the devoted father he had been for years, but as a man utterly unfit to raise a child. And worst of all, Walsh had evidence Daniel hadn't even known existed until he found those invoices in Charlotte's penthouse. Paid in full. $70,000. Proof, they claimed, that Daniel had used Lily as bait to secure money and favors from a wealthy widow. His chest tightened until he thought he might not breathe again. The air suddenly thin, inadequate. He imagined a courtroom where strangers would look at him and see only what the paper said. Poor, desperate, opportunistic. He imagined Lily being led away by a mother who hadn't stayed sober long enough to raise her. That night, Daniel swallowed his pride and called Henry Cole, the one lawyer he knew he could trust after everything with Charlotte. His voice cracked as he explained, the words tumbling out in a frantic mix of anger and raw, primal fear. She's trying to take her from me. Henry. Isabella is saying I'm not fit, that I used my own daughter to get close to Charlotte. That I sold her life for money? Henry's sigh was heavy, resigned. On the other end of the line, I've seen Walsh where Danielle. She's ruthless, and with those invoices, she's got leverage. But we'll fight. You've built a life for Lily. Neighbors? Teachers? Everyone knows it. We'll need every voice we can get to testify. Daniel sat at the edge of Lily's bed that night, watching her breathe, her tiny chest rising and falling with the deep, unwavering innocence of someone who had no idea her world might soon be ripped apart. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead, his touch feather light, and whispered, I won't let them take you. I swear I won't. But deep down, a cold dread began to seep into his bones, for he knew the stark truth. With Isabella sober now, with a steady job established in San Diego, and with Charlotte gone after their bitter fight, his chances were fragile, tenuous. The system didn't always care about devotion or love. It cared about paper trails, about appearances, about demonstrable stability. And on paper, Isabella looked like a woman reborn, while Daniel looked like a man desperately drowning. As he turned off the lamp and kissed his daughter's soft cheek, Daniel felt the first real chill of unadulterated fear seep into his very bones. The battle for Lily had truly begun, and for the first time. He wasn't sure if love alone would be enough to keep her safe within his arms. The courtroom smelt faintly of old wood and the electric hum of tension. Daniel sat rigid at the defendant's table, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles blanched white, his heart thudding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Across the aisle, Isabella looked sharp and meticulously polished in a navy suit. Her attorney, Rebecca Walsh, standing tall and formidable beside her. To the judge, to the spectators in the gallery, Isabella presented the image of a woman who had decisively rebuilt her life. Steady job, clean record, calm, unwavering demeanor. Daniel knew, with an aching certainty, that appearances could lie. But in a courtroom, appearances carried immense, unforgiving weight. Walsh's opening arguments cut deep, precise and cruel. She painted Daniel as a man barely clinging to the edges of stability. A father so desperate he had paraded his daughter, almost exploited her vulnerability, in front of wealthy strangers. She spoke of unpaid bills, of modest,
Almost impoverished living conditions, of how a child truly deserves stability, not a life of constant sacrifice.
Her words were sharp, polished knives dressed in silk, each gesture toward him feeling like a fresh wound. Daniel felt himself shrinking, being reduced to something less than what he was, less than the father he fiercely believed himself to be. Henry Cole rose in his defense, calling neighbors and teachers to testify. They spoke with genuine warmth of Daniel's unwavering devotion, how he left work early, grimy but eager, for piano lessons, how he never missed a parent-teacher conference, how Lily thrived, truly blossomed, under his loving, singular care. Their words were true, heartfelt, resonant with genuine emotion, but compared to the glossy,
Self-assured narrative. Walsh spun. They sounded small, almost fragile.
Daniel's hope, a delicate thread, began to fray. Then, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a soft, almost reverent sigh, and a hush rippled through the room. Charlotte Whitmore stepped inside. She wore a simple black dress, elegant in its understated grace, her blonde hair pulled back, her face pale, etched with the subtle shadows of sleepless night. For the first time since their devastating fight, Daniel met her eyes. What he saw there was not pity, not guilt, but an unwavering, formidable resolve that took his breath away. When Henry called her to the stand, the room leaned forward, palpable anticipation hanging in the air. Charlotte's voice was steady, clear, resonant. She told the court about that desperate night in street. Mary's, how she had seen a man fighting with every fiber of his being for his daughter's life, a man who steadfastly refused to leave her side. She admitted openly, without apology, that she had paid Lily's medical bills, not because Daniel asked, but because she could, and because Lily, innocent and vulnerable, deserve the best care possible. Mr. Alvarez never sought my money, she said firmly, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, holding everyone captive. He never once asked for help. The only thing he ever wanted was the chance to care for his daughter. Her voice softened then, a profound tenderness entering it. What I gave freely, because I cared for them, because I loved them. The word loved hung in the air, a quiet declaration. Walsh rose for cross-examination, circling Charlotte like a sleek, predatory cat. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you were deeply grieving your husband's death? That you sought to fill an emotional void by involving yourself with Mr. Alvarez and his child? Charlotte didn't flinch, her gaze steady, unwavering. I was grieving, yes, but Daniel and Lily didn't fill a void. They reminded me what family feels like. That is not something you can buy, or replace, or manipulate. It's love, real love. Her words, imbued with a quiet, undeniable power, lingered in the stunned silence that followed, and for the first time, Daniel saw a flicker of uncertainty, a tiny crack in Walsh's polished composure. Still, doubt hovered in the air, the balance precarious, fragile. Then, unexpectedly, a figure rose from the gallery, an older woman, her voice trembling, but imbued with a surprising strength, addressed the judge. Your Honor, I am Isabella's mother, and I cannot stay silent.
Gasps rippled across the courtroom, a collective intake of breath.
She went on, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I love my daughter, but she's not ready to raise Lily. 3 months sober does not erase years of absence. Stability is not a suit you put on for court. Her gaze, unwavering, found Daniel's. I've watched Daniel be the one constant in Lily's life. He's the father she needs, the father she deserves. The words fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of profound truth through every corner of the room. Daniel's breath caught, a sudden, sharp intake, his chest tightening as if hope, fragile but real, had returned. For the first time since the trial began, he allowed himself to believe that the truth, unadorned and powerful, might just be strong enough to save his little girl. The courtroom had fallen into a profound stillness, the kind of silence that hums with suspended expectation. Judge Morrison shuffled his papers, his expression grave, as though the immense weight of the decision pressed on him as much as it did on the families waiting before him. Daniel sat rigid, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white, his heart thudding a frantic, desperate rhythm in his chest. He could feel Lily's small, trusting hand resting warmly inside his, her innocent warmth a fragile anchor. Whatever the verdict, he prayed she would not sense the profound fear he carried. Then, Charlotte rose from her seat in the gallery, the soft click of her heels against the floor echoing like a bell, commanding every eye, every ear. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady, yet charged with a breathtaking emotion that made the air crackle. Before you render your decision, I would like to make a statement that may significantly impact this case. The judge arched a brow, his gaze sharp. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Whitmore. I know, she answered softly, her eyes meeting Daniel's for a fleeting, powerful moment before returning her unwavering gaze to the bench. But it's necessary. She took a deep, deliberate breath, her hands trembling just enough to betray the storm of emotion churning within her. I'm formally petitioning this court for permission to adopt Lily Alvarez as my daughter, with her father's full consent. And furthermore, her voice caught. But she pressed on, with a fierce, quiet determination. Mr. Alvarez and I intend to marry, creating a stable, two-parent household for Lily. The words landed like a clap of thunder. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca Walsh shot to her feet in outraged objection. Isabella's face hardened, contorting with fury, and even Henry Cole looked utterly stunned. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears, a deafening drumbeat, as he stared at Charlotte, unable to move, unable to breathe, lost in the sudden, shocking magnitude of her declaration. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said, his gavel rapping sharply for order. This is not the proper venue for personal petitions. But Charlotte raised her chin, her eyes bright with unshed tears, yet unwavering. With respect, Your Honor, this is the most proper place of all, because this case is about what's best for Lily, and I'm standing here to say that Lily has already become my daughter in every way that matters. I cherish her as if she were my own, and I love her father. Her gaze found Daniel's again, this time holding, unflinching, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because together they are my family, and I'm willing to put my name, my reputation, my entire life behind that truth. The sheer weight of her conviction, the raw vulnerability in her gaze, pulled Daniel forward. All eyes shifted to Daniel. He rose slowly, his chest heaving, his voice unsteady but clear, charged with an emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Charlotte, are you sure? After everything, after the mistakes we made? She turned to him fully, tears streaming now, unashamed, her vulnerability a beacon. I should have fought for us this way from the beginning. Not with money, with love. And I will never walk away again. The judge looked at Daniel, his gaze sharp, piercing. Mr.
Alvarez, do you consent to this petition?
Daniel swallowed hard, a lump in his throat, then nodded, his voice breaking, thick with a joy he hadn't thought possible. Yes, Your Honor. With all my heart? Yes, I want this. I want her. Before the gavel could fall, a small, clear voice broke the profound silence. Lily, who had been sitting quietly,
Leapt to her feet, her eyes wide with a pure,
unadulterated wonder. Does this mean Charlotte gets to be my mom for real? Her joy, bright and unfiltered, rang through the courtroom, dissolving the tension. Laughter, soft and relieved, spread across the room, even Judge Morrison's stern expression softening into the faintest, most genuine smile. He cleared his throat, his tone warmer now, imbued with a newfound understanding. Well, young lady, there are still legal steps to follow, but I must admit, in 20 years on this bench, I've rarely seen such a compelling declaration of family. Daniel reached for Charlotte's hand, his rough fingers intertwining with her soft ones, a perfect fit, as if they had always belonged together. The oppressive weight of the trial, the stinging accusations, the paralyzing fear, all of it seemed to fall away in that instant, replaced by a profound, gentle warmth that spread through his entire being. What remained was a beginning, not the end of a custody hearing, but the birth of a family, forged in vulnerability and unwavering commitment. And for the first time in a long, arduous time, Daniel allowed himself to hope, not just for survival, but for a profound, abiding joy. He squeezed her hand. A silent promise, a shared breath between them. 6 months later, the chapel at St. Mary's was dressed in the simplest, most elegant of ways. White lilies adorned the altar, their delicate scent mingling with the faint aroma of beeswax. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting jewel-toned patterns across the stone floor, illuminating a handful of cherished friends and family filling the pews. Daniel stood at the front, feeling both nervous and impossibly joyful. In a suit borrowed from his best friend at the construction site, his calloused hands fidgeting unconsciously with the ring tucked securely in his pocket. When the heavy chapel doors opened, Charlotte walked down the aisle, a vision of understated grace in a plain white dress. No glittering jewels, no grand embellishments, just her quiet, radiant beauty. At her side, skipping with unbridled excitement, was Lily, now officially his adopted daughter, carrying both rings in a small velvet box, as if she'd been entrusted with the secret to their happiness. "You look beautiful," Daniel whispered, when Charlotte reached him, his voice catching in his throat, thick with emotion. He reached out, his hand gently settling at the small of her back, the warmth of her body a profound comfort. She smiled softly, her eyes sparkling, and smoothed his crooked tie with a tender touch. "And you?" she whispered back, her voice a soft murmur. "Clean up better than I expected." The chapel filled with gentle laughter, a sound of pure contentment, then quieted as vows were spoken, promises made, lives irrevocably joined. When they finally kissed, it was a gentle, lingering press of lips, a culmination of shared vulnerability and quiet yearning. Lily, unable to contain her joy, threw her small arms around both of them, shouting, "Finally, now we're officially a family." The words, innocent and true, left not a single dry eye in the room. The celebration afterward wasn't in a grand ballroom or a lavish hotel. It was in the modest, vibrant backyard of the house they had just bought, a home near Lily's school. String lights, like captured stars, hung between the old oak trees. Mismatched tables, borrowed from neighbors, were covered in casseroles brought by friends, their comforting aromas filling the warm evening air. The sound of unrestrained laughter drifted into the soft night. Daniel's construction crew sat elbow to elbow with Charlotte's foundation board members, an unlikely, charming mix of dusty boots and polished shoes. Yet everyone felt utterly at home, enveloped in the joyful, inclusive atmosphere. For the first time, Daniel looked around and realized he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was truly living. 2 years passed, and life unfolded in ways he never could have imagined. Each day, a new layer of richness. His small construction company had grown, now boasting 3 full-time employees working diligently under his steadfast lead. Charlotte, her once lonely penthouse firmly behind her, found even greater joy in drafting community projects and managing a household alive with the beautiful, sometimes chaotic, hum of family life. And in the late summer light of their backyard, Lily, now 10 years old, sat at the picnic table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sorted screws and nails for the birdhouses Daniel taught neighborhood kids to build. She rolled her eyes playfully at his occasionally clumsy explanations. "That, you're doing it wrong," she teased, her voice filled with an easy, loving affection. Daniel laughed, wiping sweat from his brow, his gaze lingering on his daughter with profound adoration. "I've been building longer than you've been alive." "Mija, yeah, but I'm smarter," she shot back, flashing him a grin that reminded him so much of her vibrant mother, and yet so much of her own fear, burgeoning strength. When Charlotte stepped out of the house, one hand resting gently on her rounded belly, the other carrying a pitcher of fresh lemonade. The teasing stopped only for a moment. She glowed in the late afternoon sun, every bit the picture of profound peace and contentment. "Your husband is being stubborn again," Lily announced with mock seriousness. And Charlotte laughed. A rich, melodic sound, as she lowered herself carefully into a chair beside them. "Then your little sister will have to be as opinionated as you," she replied, her eyes twinkling. Daniel knelt, pressing a tender kiss to Charlotte's forehead, before whispering conspiratorially to her belly. "Hear that? Baby girl, your big sister is already plotting against me." Lily folded her arms, pretending to be serious. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm going to be a doctor. Remember, I'm going to fix people who are broken. Just like Mom fixed our family." Charlotte's eyes filled with sudden tears, and Daniel's throat tightened at the sound of that one word, Mom, spoken with such casual, absolute certainty. 2 years earlier, it had been a fragile hope, a whispered dream. Now it was simply, beautifully true. As the sun dipped behind the houses, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the backyard rang with the joyful sounds of children playing, neighbors chatting, and the beautiful, reassuring chaos of a home built entirely on love, on choice. Daniel looked around, his arm around Charlotte's waist, feeling the gentle curve of her pregnancy against him, his daughter's bright laughter filling the air. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that this was everything he had never dared to dream. Family, he realized, isn't always about blood. Sometimes it is chosen, meticulously built day by day with forgiveness, with infinite patience, and with the immense courage to trust again, to open one's heart once more. And in the gentle glow of string lights and the vibrant sound of laughter, he understood at last. This was the life he had been building toward all along.
This was his home, his sanctuary, his love.